The sun gleamed off the perfectly trimmed hedges of whispering pines as Elena Harrington made her morning rounds. For 15 long years, she had ruled this neighborhood as HOA president, and it showed. Not a single fence was painted the wrong shade, not one garden dared to grow unauthorized plants, and heaven help anyone who left their trash can out past 8 a.m. on collection day. Eleanor was in her early 60s with hair so perfectly blonde it almost looked unreal. She had a closet full of expensive pantsuits and an attitude that screamed, "I want to speak to your manager," before she even opened her mouth. The neighbors called her Eleanor from the HOA to her face, but whispered HOA Karen when she walked away. Another perfect day in our perfect community, Eleanor would often say to herself as she patrolled the streets, clipboard in hand, hunting for rule breakers. She truly believed she was protecting everyone's property values. In her mind, she wasn't being controlling, she was being helpful. The other homeowners had learned to live with Eleanor's strict ways. They'd painted their houses the approved colors, planted only the approved plants, and kept their cars in their garages instead of their driveways. Life in Whispering Pines was peaceful, if a bit boring. Then the Thompsons moved in. The Thompson family bought the last house on Oak Lane, right where the manicured lawns of Whispering Pines met the wild woods beyond. They seemed nice enough at first, a couple with 2 kids and a golden retriever. But within weeks, Elena was keeping a special file labeled Thompson violations. "Did you see they put up a bird feeder without approval?" she complained to the other board members. "And Mrs. Thompson actually hung laundry in their backyard last Tuesday." What really bothered Eleanor wasn't just the small rule violations. It was something about the way Mrs. Thompson smiled and said, "We'll get to it when we can," whenever Eleanor pointed out an infraction. Nobody in Whispering Pines had ever been so unbothered by her authority. Eleanor began watching the Thompson house more closely. She'd drive by 3 or 4 times a day, noting every little thing. The kids left bicycles on the front lawn. Mr. Thompson started building what looked like a tree house without submitting architectural plans. Worst of all, they seemed happy, despite not following all the rules. One morning, while taking pictures of the Thompsons' unapproved garden gnome, Eleanor noticed something interesting. The old survey stakes marking the edge of their property seemed to be in the wrong place. She pulled out the community maps she kept in her car and squinted at the boundary lines. "Well, I'll be," she whispered to herself. According to the faded lines on her map, about 2 acres of the woods behind the Thompsons' house weren't wild forest at all. They belonged to the HOA's common areas. Eleanor's heart raced as she walked along the tree line, finding old, rusted survey markers partially hidden by leaves and undergrowth. In her mind, a plan began to form. This wasn't just a chance to put the Thompsons in their place. This was an opportunity to expand the community's park, add more controlled landscape, and remind everyone who really ran things around here. She snapped a few more pictures of the boundary markers and hurried home to check the official documents. Elena didn't notice how her hands shook with excitement as she dug through the HOA records, or how her face flushed with the thrill of what she was about to do. All she knew was that she had found a way to make Whispering Pines even more perfect, her kind of perfect, and nobody, especially not the Thompsons, was going to stop her. Eleanor spent 3 whole days going through old HOA papers. She dug out yellowed maps, faded property surveys from 1992, and county records that nobody had looked at in years. Some pages had coffee stains, others had torn edges, but to Eleanor, they were gold. She called an emergency board meeting for Thursday night. The other 5 board members showed up at the community center, confused about the urgency. There was Tom, who mostly joined the board to have something to do after retirement. Brenda, who only cared about the community pool rules. Rick, who never said no to Eleanor. Pat, who usually fell asleep during meetings. And Diane, who occasionally questioned things but typically gave in. "I've made an alarming discovery," Eleanor announced, spreading the old documents across the table with a theatrical flourish. "Nearly 2 acres of HOA land have been essentially stolen from us." The board members leaned forward, suddenly interested. "Look here," Eleanor pointed to the faded lines on a map. "All this wooded area behind the Thompson property, it belongs to us, to all of us. And if we don't act fast, we might lose it forever." "How would we lose it?" asked Diane, adjusting her glasses to see the map better. Adverse possession, Eleanor said, using a legal term she'd looked up online. If we don't use it, we could lose our claim to it. This wasn't exactly true, but none of the board members knew enough real estate law to challenge her. Eleanor clicked a button on her laptop, and a colorful presentation appeared on the wall. I propose we reclaim our land and turn it into something beautiful for the community. The slides showed pictures of a charming park extension with a small pond, a white gazebo, and stone pathways winding through carefully arranged flower beds. It looked nothing like the natural woodland currently there, with its messy underbrush and wild animals. Wouldn't this cost a fortune? Tom asked, always concerned about the budget. I've crunched the numbers, Eleanor said confidently. We have enough in our reserve fund, especially if we use Green Valley Landscaping. They've given us a very competitive quote. What Eleanor didn't mention was that Green Valley Landscaping was owned by her son-in-law Phil. She also didn't mention the kickback she'd get for bringing in such a big project. In her mind, it wasn't really wrong. She was improving the community after all. The fact that her family would profit was just a nice bonus. Shouldn't we get a new land survey first? Diane asked. These maps are pretty old. Eleanor had prepared for this question. A new survey would cost thousands of dollars we don't need to spend. These documents are legally filed with the county. They're perfectly valid. The board talked for another hour, but the outcome was never really in doubt. They voted 5-1 to approve a $75,000 budget for what Eleanor called community land improvement. Only Diane voted no, but even she didn't push too hard. The very next morning, Eleanor called Phil to tell him the good news. Then she contacted Riverside Development, a construction company known for working fast, asking few questions, and offering cash discounts. The owner, Bob, had done work for Eleanor before and knew better than to suggest permits or environmental studies unless absolutely required. When do you want to start? Bob asked. Eleanor pulled up the Thompson family's Facebook page on her computer. She'd been monitoring their social media for weeks. They're going to Disney World for spring break, she said, looking at Mrs. Thompson's excited post about their upcoming vacation. They'll be gone for 2 whole weeks starting April 3rd. I want your bulldozers there at 7 a.m. on April 4th. By the time they get back, it'll be too late for them to do anything about it. Bob hesitated for just a moment, then agreed. The check Eleanor promised would cover his son's college tuition for the semester. As Eleanor hung up the phone, she smiled to herself. Soon, Whispering Pines would be even more perfect, and the Thompsons would finally learn who really was in charge around here. The quiet morning peace of Whispering Pines was shattered at exactly 7:02 a.m. The rumbling began like distant thunder, growing louder until it rattled teacups in cabinets and woke up even the deepest sleepers. 3 massive yellow bulldozers crawled down Oak Lane, followed by 2 dump trucks and a van filled with workers in hard hats. Mrs. Wilson, out walking her poodle, stopped dead in her tracks. Mr. Lee, who was picking up his newspaper, stood frozen in his bathrobe as the procession passed his driveway. By the time the machinery reached the end of the road where the Thompsons' house sat empty, a small crowd of neighbors had gathered in confused clusters. And there was Eleanor, dressed like she was overseeing a military operation in pressed khakis and a light blue button-up shirt, her blonde hair perfectly set despite the early hour. She held her ever-present clipboard and wore a neon yellow safety vest that seemed to announce her authority. "What on earth is going on?" asked Mrs. Wilson, her poodle barking frantically at the noisy machines. Eleanor smiled the tight smile of someone who knows they're in charge. "Community Improvement Project. We're reclaiming HOA land and creating a lovely park extension that everyone can enjoy." Before anyone could ask more questions, she thrust papers into their hands. Copies of the old survey with certain sections highlighted in yellow. Most people just glanced at them, confused by the technical markings and property descriptions. The bulldozers didn't wait for everyone to understand. They pushed past the tree line behind the Thompsons' house, and the horrific cracking sound of the first tree falling made several neighbors gasp. The workers moved with practiced efficiency, cutting down smaller trees with chainsaws before the bulldozers pushed them into piles. "Shouldn't there be some kind of notice about this?" asked Mr. Chen, who lived 2 doors down from the Thompsons. "I mean, this seems pretty major." "It was in the HOA newsletter last month," Eleanor lied smoothly. The newsletter had mentioned spring improvements, but nothing about bulldozing 2 acres of woods. By mid-morning, the destruction was well underway. What had been a peaceful woodland was becoming a muddy, torn-up mess. Birds circled overhead, their nests destroyed. A family of rabbits darted across the street, seeking new shelter as their home was demolished. More neighbors came out to watch as the day went on. Some seemed excited about the idea of a new park area. Others looked concerned about the environmental damage. Most just stood in stunned silence as the landscape they were used to seeing completely changed before their eyes. Around lunchtime, an older man with a bushy gray beard approached Eleanor. Frank Delgado had retired from the state's Environmental Protection Department 5 years ago, and everyone in the neighborhood respected his opinion on such matters. "Eleanor," he said, his voice calm but concerned, "I don't see any erosion control measures in place. And what about the watershed? This area drains directly into Willow Creek." Eleanor's smile tightened even more. "Frank, I appreciate your concern, but we have everything under control. The HOA has full authority to improve its property." "But the permits," Frank began. "Are you an HOA board member, Frank?" Eleanor interrupted. "No." "Then I suggest you check Section 8.3 of the bylaws regarding interference with authorized community improvements." She turned away before he could respond, making a show of checking something on her clipboard. By late afternoon, the damage was shocking. Nearly an acre of once beautiful forest had been reduced to stumps and churned earth. The natural slope of the land had been flattened in some places, creating unnatural pools of muddy water. The workers were putting up a temporary fence around the cleared area with signs reading "Future Site of WHISPRING Pines Park Extension, HOA Project Steed in Pro-Joyasis." As the sun began to set, the workers packed up for the day. Eleanor made sure to tell the crew leader to be back at 7 a.m. sharp the next morning. She wanted as much work done as possible before the Thompsons returned from their vacation. Walking to her car, Eleanor didn't notice the worried glances exchanged between neighbors or how Frank Delgado was taking pictures of the destroyed land with a grim expression. She was too busy planning where to put the gazebo. The Thompson family's minivan turned onto Oak Lane 3 days earlier than planned. 10-year-old Lily had developed an ear infection at Disney World, and they decided to cut their vacation short. Mrs. Thompson was holding a sleeping Lily in the backseat while Mr. Thompson drove, their son Pete playing a video game beside them. "What the?" Mr. Thompson slowed the car as they approached their house. The familiar landscape behind their property was completely changed. Where there had once been a dense line of trees shielding their backyard from view, there was now a muddy, torn-up field with construction equipment parked along the edges. "What happened to the woods?" Pete asked, looking up from his game. Mrs. Thompson gently laid Lily down and stepped out of the car, her face pale with shock. Their home was intact, but their private backyard now faced what looked like a war zone. Piles of tree trunks and branches were stacked haphazardly. Yellow bulldozers sat silent in the late afternoon sun. A temporary fence with HOA signs surrounded the entire area. "I'm calling the police," Mr. Thompson said, pulling out his phone. The police arrived quickly but seemed confused about the situation. "It appears to be an HOA project," Officer Reynolds explained after examining the signs. "Civil matter, not criminal. You'll need to take it up with your homeowners association." Mrs. Thompson wasn't just any homeowner. In her professional life, she was Lisa Thompson, environmental attorney with the regional law firm of Goldstein and Barker. She specialized in land use disputes and watershed protection. "I'll handle this," she told her husband, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Take the kids inside and get Lily settled." She didn't have to look far to find Eleanor. The HOA president was supervising workers as they installed more sections of temporary fencing. "Eleanor," Lisa called out, walking straight toward her. "What is going on here?" Eleanor turned, her surprise quickly masked by a practiced smile. "Oh, you're back early. We're just making some community improvements. It's going to be lovely when it's finished." "This is protected woodland," Lisa said, gesturing to the destruction. "You can't just bulldoze it." Eleanor's smile didn't falter as she reached for her bag and pulled out her folder of documents. "Actually, according to these surveys, this land belongs to the HOA common areas. We're well within our rights to improve it." Lisa took the papers and examined them carefully. These surveys are from 1992. The property lines were redrawn in 2010 when the Watershed Protection Act went into effect. Our HOA predates any watershed nonsense. Elena dismissed her with a wave. And our documents are properly filed with the county. Lisa's professional calm was beginning to crack. Did you get environmental impact studies, watershed management permits, county approval for land clearing of this scale? We don't need. And what about the protected wetland designation? Lisa interrupted, pointing to the muddy pools forming in the churned earth. This area feeds directly into the state-protected Willow Creek system. For the first time, Eleanor looked uncertain, but she recovered quickly. I'm not aware of any wetland designation. Our documents clearly show. My documents show something very different, Lisa cut in. Before we bought this house, I personally commissioned a land survey. I have current, official documentation showing that most of this land is protected state conservation land, not HOA property. A small crowd of neighbors had gathered to watch the confrontation. Elena was acutely aware of the audience and fought to maintain control of the situation. Well, your survey must be wrong, she said firmly. The board has approved this project and work will continue as planned. We break ground for the gazebo foundations tomorrow. Lisa stepped closer, her voice low but intense. No, you won't. I'm filing for an emergency injunction first thing in the morning, and I'm contacting the Environmental Protection Agency tonight. You can't stop progress, Eleanor said, but her voice lacked its usual confidence. This isn't progress, Lisa replied, gesturing to the devastated landscape. This is destruction, and it's illegal. As she walked away, Lisa noticed Frank Delgado watching from the edge of the crowd. He gave her a small nod of approval and pulled out his phone. By nightfall, Lisa Thompson had made 17 phone calls. By morning, Eleanor Harrington's perfect plan would begin to crumble around her. The next morning dawned bright and clear, but there was nothing bright about Eleanor's day. She arrived at the construction site at 6:30 a.m., hoping to get work started early, only to find Lisa Thompson already there, along with two men in official-looking jackets. Eleanor Harrington, asked the taller man, holding up a badge. I'm Jeff Wilson from the County Planning Department. This is Alberto Ramirez from the State Environmental Protection Agency. Eleanor forced a smile. How can I help you, gentlemen? We need to see your permits for this land clearing operation, said Jeff, notebook already in hand. And we'll need to inspect the site immediately, added Alberto, eyeing the muddy runoff that was flowing toward the creek. Eleanor clutched her folder tighter. I have all our HOA documentation right here. The board approved this project last week. HOA approval isn't the same as county permits, Jeff explained patiently. For a project of this size, you need land disturbance permits, erosion control plans, and environmental impact assessments. And since this appears to involve a wetland area, Alberto added, gesturing to the soggy ground, you would need special watershed protection permits as well. Eleanor felt her control slipping. I wasn't aware. Ms. Harrington wasn't aware because she didn't ask. Lisa Thompson cut in. And work continued yesterday even after I informed her of these issues. Alberto walked to the edge of the cleared area where muddy water was pooling. He took samples in small vials and photos with his phone. Jeff measured the disturbed area with a laser tool and made notes on an official form. I'm afraid all work needs to stop immediately, Jeff announced, pulling a stack of papers from his bag. This is a stop work order. No further clearing or construction can take place until proper permits are obtained. Eleanor took the papers with shaking hands. This is ridiculous. The HOA has the right to improve its own property. Alberto looked up from his water sample. First question is whether this actually is HOA property. Second question is whether the proper procedures were followed. Based on what I'm seeing, the answer to both might be no. By noon, more officials had arrived. The district attorney's office sent an investigator named Paula Green, who started interviewing the construction workers. One by one, she took them aside, asking questions about who hired them, what they were told about permits, and what documents they had been shown. Frank Delgado approached Paula with his phone. I took these pictures yesterday, he explained. You can see there are no silt fences or erosion control measures in place. And look here, this is a blue-spotted salamander. They're a protected species that lives in these wetlands. The construction crew stood around awkwardly, not sure if they should leave or stay. Bob, the owner of Riverside Development, argued heatedly with Eleanor near his truck. "You told me everything was approved," he shouted, no longer caring who heard. "I can't afford to have my equipment impounded." "Keep your voice down," Eleanor hissed. "This is just a misunderstanding." But it was much more than that. The officials discovered that the survey Eleanor had been using had been altered. Someone had extended the HOA property lines by almost 100 feet in some places, lines that conveniently included the wetland area she wanted for her park. "Did you alter these documents, Ms. Harrington?" Paul asked, holding up the suspicious survey in a plastic evidence bag. "Of course not," Eleanor protested, though her face had gone pale. "That's how they were when I found them in the HOA records." More neighbors gathered to watch as the officials combed through the site. Some took videos on their phones. Others whispered among themselves, wondering how Eleanor could have made such a huge mistake. But Paula Green was beginning to suspect it wasn't a mistake at all. When she contacted the county recorder's office, they confirmed that the official survey on file showed completely different boundaries than Eleanor's version. "We're going to need to see the HOA financial records as well," Paula told Eleanor as the day wore on. "All contracts related to this project, board meeting minutes, everything." Eleanor's perfect world was collapsing around her. As she watched Alberto take more water samples from the creek downstream, she noticed Lisa Thompson talking quietly with several board members who had shown up to see what was happening. "It's not just the land," Lisa was explaining to them. "If environmental damage is proven, the fines could bankrupt the HOA. Every homeowner could be liable." For the first time in 15 years, Eleanor saw fear in the board members' eyes, fear directed at her. The investigation quickly grew beyond the land-clearing disaster. Once officials started looking into Eleanor's dealings as HOA president, they found a trail of suspicious activities dating back years. In a small conference room at the county building, Paula Green spread dozens of financial documents across the table. "Look at these landscaping contracts," she told her team. Over the past 5 years, Green Valley Landscaping has received $214,000 for HOA work. She pulled up a business registration on her laptop. And guess who owns Green Valley? Philip Harrington, Eleanor's son-in-law. "Were there any competitive bids?" asked one of the investigators. Paula shook her head. "None. And these invoices are all significantly higher than market rate." Meanwhile, at Whispering Pines, the mood had shifted dramatically. Neighbors who once feared Eleanor's clipboard inspections now gathered in living rooms to share stories. Years of resentment came pouring out. "She fined me $200 because my Christmas lights were up until January 3rd, said Mrs. Wilson. "The bylaws only specified they had to be down by early January." "She made my daughter cry when she shut down her lemonade stand," added Mr. Lay. "Said it violated commercial activity restrictions." The most stunning evidence came from an unexpected source. Bob from Riverside Development, worried about his own legal exposure, turned over all his communications with Eleanor. "She promised me 3 more projects if I did this one quickly and quietly," he admitted to investigators. "She said the gazebo contract alone would be worth $45,000, but I'd need to kick back 10% to her consulting company." The HOA board members were horrified when they discovered how they'd been manipulated. Tom, the retired board member, brought in boxes of old meeting minutes. "She would give us selective information," he explained. "Parts of reports, partial quotes from bylaws. We trusted her because, well, who wants to read through all this boring stuff? She knew we wouldn't check." Brenda, who had mostly cared about pool rules, was in tears. "I never thought to ask about the financial reports. She would just show us these colorful charts saying everything was fine." Rick, who had never said no to Eleanor, looked deflated. She made disagreeing with her so unpleasant. "The one time I questioned a decision, she spread rumors that I was trying to lower property values so I could buy more houses cheaply." The forensic accountants discovered that Eleanor had set up a consulting company called Community Standards Advisors that had received thousands of dollars in kickbacks from various contractors. The company's only employee was Eleanor herself. It was the perfect setup, Paula explained to the district attorney. She controlled who got the contracts, inflated the prices, then took a cut through her consulting company for advising the contractors on HOA standards. Lisa Thompson reviewed the findings with growing dismay. The real tragedy is that everyone's HOA fees were being wasted, she told her husband as they sat on their back porch, looking at the muddy mess that had once been beautiful woods. People thought they were paying for community improvements, but they were actually funding Eleanor's scheme. When investigators confronted Eleanor with the evidence, her carefully constructed facade finally crumbled. "I deserved compensation for all my hard work," she shouted, pounding the table in the interview room. "Do you have any idea how much time I put into making this community perfect? The board members did nothing. Nothing. So you felt entitled to take money without disclosing your relationship to the contractors?" Paula asked calmly. "I made excellent recommendations," Eleanor insisted. "My son-in-law does good work." "And the altered survey documents?" Eleanor fell silent, then asked to speak with her attorney. As news of the investigation spread, other HOA boards in the county began reviewing their own practices. The story appeared in the local newspaper, then got picked up by regional news. HOA President's land grab scheme exposed. For the residents of Whispering Pines, the most painful revelation was learning how easily they had surrendered their community to one controlling person. Diane, the board member who occasionally questioned things, summed it up at an emergency community meeting. "We were so afraid of breaking rules that we forgot the rules are supposed to serve us, not control us." Eleanor's perfect world hadn't just crumbled, it had never really existed at all. The county courthouse was packed on the day of Eleanor's hearing. Nearly every resident of Whispering Pines squeezed into the benches, whispering among themselves as they waited. When Eleanor entered in a subdued gray pantsuit, so different from her usual colorful outfits, many were shocked by how ordinary she looked without her clipboard and air of authority. The charges against her were read aloud: fraud, document falsification, misappropriation of HOA funds, and multiple environmental violations. The evidence was overwhelming. Rather than face a lengthy trial, Eleanor had agreed to a plea deal. The judge, a stern woman with silver-rimmed glasses, addressed the court. "Ms. Harrington, you abused the trust of your community for personal gain. You damaged protected wetlands that will take years to recover. You treated your neighbor's money as your personal fund." Eleanor stared at the floor as the judge continued. "As per your plea agreement, you were sentenced to 5 years of probation. You will pay $175,000 in restitution to the Homeowners Association, plus $82,000 in environmental remediation costs. And you are permanently barred from serving on any Homeowners Association board or similar position of community authority." A collective sigh swept through the courtroom. For many residents, the punishment seemed too light, but others were simply relieved that justice had been served in some form. Outside the courthouse, Lisa Thompson faced a crowd of reporters. "Today marks the beginning of healing for our community," she said, "but there's much work to be done, both in repairing our environment and rebuilding trust among neighbors." The reconstruction of Whispering Pines began almost immediately. The first community meeting post-Eleanor was chaotic but cathartic. People who had barely spoken to each other in years shared their hopes and frustrations openly. "I think we need term limits for board members," suggested Mrs. Wilson, who had previously been too intimidated to speak at meetings. "No one should have that much power for so long." "And transparent finances," added Mr. Lay. "All contracts should be open for everyone to see." Over the following months, the community drafted new bylaws. The changes weren't just about rules, they were about values. Meetings that once focused on violations and fines now centered on community building and environmental stewardship. The most visible transformation happened in the damaged wetland area. Under Frank Delgado's guidance, the community partnered with local environmental groups to restore what had been destroyed. Weekend volunteers planted native trees and installed proper drainage systems. Children from the neighborhood school created habitats for the returning wildlife. 10-year-old Lily Thompson, now recovered from her ear infection, became passionate about the blue-spotted salamanders that were slowly returning to the area. "Before, I didn't even know they lived here," she told her classmates during a presentation. Now I help count them every month. The restoration project became a source of unexpected pride. Neighbors who had once competed over lawn perfection now compared notes on which native plants attracted the most pollinators. The uniformity that Eleanor had enforced gave way to a more natural, diverse landscape. Lisa Thompson, once viewed with suspicion as the newcomer who challenged Eleanor, was elected to the new board. Under her leadership, the HOA focused on balancing reasonable standards with personal freedom. "We can have a beautiful community without controlling every detail," became her unofficial motto. 3 years after the bulldozer incident, Whispering Pines hosted its first community and conservation fair. Visitors from neighboring developments walked paths through the restored wetland, now lush with native vegetation. Information booths explained the delicate balance of the ecosystem and how proper land management benefited everyone. Tom, the retired board member, volunteered as a guide. "See that area there?" he would tell visitors, pointing to the thriving woodland. "That's what almost disappeared forever." It teaches us that sometimes the most valuable parts of a community aren't the man-made improvements, but the natural gifts we protect together. The story of HOA Karen and the Bulldozers became a cautionary tale taught at regional housing conferences. Property management companies used it in training sessions about ethical leadership and environmental responsibility. But for the people of Whispering Pines, it wasn't just a lesson in what to avoid. It was a reminder of what they had built together from the rubble of one person's destructive vision. A true community rooted in mutual respect and a shared love for the place they all called home.